This story pokes a little fun at some of the foibles of married life, because when it comes to humor, there's nothing quite as funny as innocent family interactions. For one reason, is because they're real and, well, we all participate. For instance, remember the famous Henny Youngman line, "Take my wife, please," which I read that was actually a misinterpretation. Henny said that in 1930, an usher in a theater asked if he could escort Henny and his wife to their seats, when in all innocence, Henny let the hilariously iconic line just slip out. So that's the first reason. The second reason that stories about married life are so funny is because they're ageless. That same line, "Take my wife, please," would have been just as funny said 2,000 years ago as it is as when it's said today. And there's no better way to illustrate that than with this next story, which is a famous Chinese folktale that takes place during the Han Dynasty, way back 200 BC. And it's called The Mirror. Once, long ago in China, during the early Han time, there was a charcoal maker named Wang. Now, Wang was a simple man who lived with his wife and mother-in-law in a small country village not far from a wagon road where once each month, merchants with their wagon train in tow would stop and buy Wang's charcoal and take it to the ironworks in the big city, 2 days' ride from the village. When one day, after a week of torrential rain, the bridge below the village washed out, making it impossible for the wagon train to reach the enclave, and thus unable that month to pick up Wang's charcoal, which, as it turned out, was really little more than an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe, since Wang could do what he'd always done when he first started out when he was younger: carry his charcoal himself to the ironworks. That way, he would have, at this time, he would have, by carrying his charcoal himself, he would have a little extra money with which he could buy his wife a gift. And as a bonus on top of that, afterward, why, he could have a look around the city where he hadn't been since he was a little boy. So deciding that's what he'd do, Wang then asked his wife what sort of gift she would most like for him to bring back for her. Well, she told him, she'd have to think about that. So she did, and not long after, it came to her. "A comb," she told her husband. "Oh, my husband, I would like you to bring me back a beautiful comb like the courtiers wear in their hair at the imperial court. A comb like that." She pointed out the window to the crescent moon outside. "A comb shape just like that." "Very well," Wang agreed. So a few days later, loaded up and ready to go, Wang shouldered his long carrying pole, slung at each end with 2 wide bamboo baskets stacked to the brim with charcoal, and off he went. Now, although the road was still quite wet, as long as Wang avoided the wagon ruts, the footing wasn't too bad. So 2 days later, he arrived at the ironworks, where he sold his charcoal, stowed his carrying pole and baskets, and with a handful of copper coins in his pockets, Wang set off to explore the big city. Now, as I said, it had been years, many years, since Wang had been to the big city. In fact, the last time he was there was with his father when he was still a young boy, when the city looked nothing like it did today. What with all the big buildings that weren't there before, and the throngs and throngs of people, and street after street filled with shops and stores selling things he'd never seen before, things from all over the world. Why, just the sight of it nearly overwhelmed him. Best of all were the warm, exotic smells that wafted up from the street vendors and sweetmeat shops, which proffered the most heavenly food that he'd ever seen or tasted. So sampling one treat after another, Wang stepped into this shop and looked into that shop as he wandered around and spent the whole afternoon in the big city. And thus it went, the classic tale of the country boy, his eyes all agog as if seeing the big city for the first time, except that Wang was no longer a boy, of course, and although impressed, the simplicity of his life in the country and his charcoal business and providing for his wife was never really far from his thoughts. In fact, he said proudly about himself, "Oh my goodness, it's getting late. If I know what's good for me, I better get busy and find a gift for my wife." So in a panic, Wang ducked into the first shop he came to and told the shopkeeper that he quick needed to find a suitable gift to return home with for his wife. But for the life of him, after looking at this and that all day long, shopping in the city, he couldn't remember what it is that she asked for him to bring back for her. So he thought and he thought as he paced around the shop until he happened to look out the front window at the moon. "That's it," Wang replied. "My wife, she told me what she wanted for me to bring back for her. Look just like the moon." "Ah," said the shopkeeper. "Well then, I have just the thing." So the shopkeeper went back to a display table at the back of the shop, and he brought back out with him a round handheld mirror. Women love these. Round, just like the moon that shone outside the shop's front window. "Women love these," he told Wang. Now Wang, who grew up in the country, had never seen a mirror before, or if he hadn't paid any attention, because when he looked at it and he saw his reflection, he was taken aback. "Who is that man?" he asked. And after a little chuckle, the shopkeeper said, "You must be from the country. I've heard mirrors are a rarity there. So just think, now you'll make your wife a celebrity, the first woman in the village to own one." "Yes, indeed," Wang agreed. So the shopkeeper wrapped the mirror up in a soft cotton cloth, and Wang carefully slipped it into his satchel, then retrieved his carrying pole and baskets, and set off for home by the light of the now round moon. Now, as you might imagine, the trip home for Wang was considerably more pleasant now that he didn't have to carry his heavy load of charcoal, and was made even more so 2 days later when he stepped through the front door of his house, where his wife and his mother-in-law had prepared a big feast in celebration of his safe return. So after dinner, they all went out onto the front porch where Wang lit his pipe when his wife asked him, "Husband, did you remember my gift?" "Of course," Wang replied assuredly. "How could I forget?" So Wang pulled her present out of his satchel and handed it to her. And like a little schoolgirl giggling with excitement, she began to meticulously unfold the cotton cloth that the mirror was wrapped in, turning it over and over each time as she did so, until just at last, when just the tiniest bit of cotton cloth remained, she turned it over for the last time and stared. For just like Wang, she'd never seen a mirror before. And when she saw her reflection, the pleasant quizzical look that Wang expected to see cross her face was instead anguish, then tears and thought and sobs as she cried unexpectedly, "Oh, my husband, how could you do this to me? Have I not been a good wife for you, faithful for you, obedient to your every command? And this is how you repay me? Oh, husband, how could you be so cruel?" And on and on and on she went until a panic her mother came running out of the house. Daughter, what is the matter? Whatever in the world is going on?" "Wang," she pointed toward her husband. "My husband Wang. He has gone to the big city and brought back a new wife for him. Look." So her mother-in-law took the mirror and stared into it herself, then said, "Oh my, it's one thing if Wang went to the big city and brought back a new wife for him, that's true. If he did, why not so young and pretty instead of that old hag?"
Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and honored guests, this is honest to God true. There was a woman standing. She had some brown and black stuff painted all over her face, and she had a knife up toward me, and I wasn't too sure what was happening. Well, I need to give you a little background story before I go to tell you any more. I usually get along with anybody, and my parents, told us we need to get along with everybody, whether it's on the playground or at work, because there's always compromising. And we have something called now that SWAT, what was it? the SWOT evaluation or whatever. It's your strengths and weaknesses, your opportunities and your threats. And everyone has something to offer. We're strong in one thing, maybe weak in another thing. So, but we should just accept everyone the way they are. But there's one person I worked with who I could not get along with at all. She was a unit secretary at the burn unit. One big thing, she was from New York, and everything was much better than in New York. Washington was very backwards. I asked her, why don't you go back to New York? I never got a straight answer from that. Her children were just somewhat younger than I was. And her daughter graduated from college and she worked at a very swanky hotel, but she was the gopher, basically. And there'd be, celebrities in Seattle that stayed there, and she'd run up glasses or toothpaste or soap up to them and she would meet them. But my Diane would keep on saying how wonderful her daughter's life was. Well, she'd look at me, well, your patients only play with matches. That's who, I'm screwing this one up, play with matches. And she also had a son that was getting married. And she made a big deal out of that too. And I'd always roll my eyes. I saw a picture of her son and of her future daughter-in-law. I'm just happy they found each other because I don't know who else would want them. But anyway, she said, oh, I'm sorry this upsets you, Eileen. My son's getting married and you probably never will. She really grated at me. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I don't know. Hers could. Then one time we all tried to get along and, I didn't say too much. And she was losing some weight. And some of us came around and said, hey, Diane, you're looking great. You're losing weight. And she said, yes, I am losing some weight, aren't I? And they said, well, what's the name of your diet? Well, my doctor has me on a very special diet, but none of you can be on this particular diet because you need self-control. I have self-control. You do not. Well, sticks and stones might break my bones, and these were fighting words. Oh, so anyway, to keep on her self-control regime, she would have to eat at 10:30. And many times we'd have patients coming in, or we had to discharge them, or a very bad burn would come in. We're busy. You didn't even think about eating. But Diane would be there crying. She had to eat. So I would dismiss her. That's okay, Diane. I'll answer the phone with one hand and do CPR with the other, or do it all the time. And then the other thing, at 6:45 in the morning, part of her regime, she had to have an orange, which is fine. And you could smell that orange regardless. And oranges, fortunately, smell pleasant. But after a while, that orangey smell of self-control just got to me. And I said, this is war. All right. So that evening, I went to Fred Meyer right down there on the Meridian and bought some devil's food cake, Duncan Hines, right? And bought some canned cherries. This is one of my grandmother's favorite recipes. She's Irish. She doesn't like to cook that much. You whip up that chocolate cake and put in those cherries and bake it. And then another thing I added to it, when I took that cake out, I put a little layer of chocolate frosting on top when it was warm. So some of that chocolate frosting would just sink right down into that cake. I let that cool and then put regular frosting on top. And it wasn't, fantastic, but it really tastes great. So I brought it in the next day. I've got some cake in the kitchen or in the break room. And if everyone says, oh, this is great. Diana got some, oh, I'm sorry, you're on your diet. But I would bring some type of thing to eat every single day. And it doesn't take much. You got Duncan Hines, you can create anything. And for the most part, we as nurses, we were busy and we were rather active, didn't have a lot of time to eat. We were running up and down the stairs, moving patients. So a few extra calories really didn't hurt us. And it was kind of welcome. Plus, many times the doctors, they were very busy too. They didn't eat too much. So they go back to the kitchen to grab some coffee, and there was some cake. Can anyone have this cake? Sure. So they would be walking down the hall with their coffee and their cake, and they'd sit right next to Diane, say, this is great. And they didn't know the plot at all. So anyway, then birthdays came around, and we didn't make a big deal of birthdays, but I thought everyone should celebrate their life. It's just one of those things you've got to do. So I would get a card and a cake and a little gift, like $5 worth. Hey, Lee, here's a card for Steve. It's his birthday today. And remember, there's cake in the back. All right, Shirley, Steve's birthday's today. Could you please sign the card? And don't forget about the cake. Diane, here, Steve's birthday today. Could you please sign the card? And don't forget about the cake. And Diane was just, we'd be steaming. Well, this would be going on. And I think Diane took a few little pieces of cake. I can't say for sure, but she was rather angry about the whole thing. Then my supervisor came around and said, Eileen, is there something going on between you and Diane? And I said, well, all I'm saying is the high priestess of self-control is going down. Betty said, well, okay. But she goes, I'm the one gaining weight here. Anyway, so as time went on, we were, get busy. People were eating cake and everyone was having a good time. But as we got busy, and sometimes this is something that I'm kind of ashamed of a bit, is when you do have an addiction or an impulsion, sometimes when things are going bad, you go to that. And one day we were having one heck of a day. And I was walking down the hall and I hear this scream. And I was also looking at the air, it was rather blue as it was coming out. And then I heard a crash. And then out came Diane, chocolate cake all over her face. And she was walking toward me with a knife. Well, it was a cake knife, right? And she wasn't that violent. But she looked at me, she goes, you have ruined my life. And of course I said, well, whatever. And I kept on doing what I wanted to do. Well, victory was sweet. Revenge was sweet. But, I do have to think about that. It isn't right to take someone off their diet. But when someone challenges you with, you don't have any self-control, I don't know. I don't have self-control. I just let it rip. Mr. Toastmaster.
And it is a true story. And it happened not too long ago. And artificial intelligence is a problem that I have because it's taking over our life. You've heard about these smart houses. Now they have smart cars. And now they're starting to come up with cars that can pull trailers and not even be connected through artificial intelligence. Well, artificial intelligence can have its place. But in my home, very, very limited. I want to be able to control it. Now, I grew up at a time before computers were even around. A computer was what they would basically be like an abacus, to where you could move little beads back and forth, and that was your computer. Or you could count on your fingers, and that was the computer I used most often. I could compute 1 + 1 = 2, 1 + 1 = 3, + 1 = 4. I was really good at that. Well, after a while, and as I became a teenager, they started coming up with computers. They were as big as a house, bigger than a house, a warehouse. Then they got smaller and smaller and smaller. Well, now we have almost 2 generations that don't know what it's like not to have computers in their hands, either on laptop. Remember the desktop ones that we always had? Those were fantastic, but they started out with typewriters. During the time that these computers are being developed, we have had forewarning as what's going to happen when artificial intelligence takes over. We have movies. Remember the one about being up in space and the computer named HAL taking over and killing off humans? We have computers that go off into space that with some of them like R2-D2, they're supposed to be good, not always. But we have a lot of different kinds. And I remember Twilight Zone, in which this was back in the 50s and 60s, 70s, that computers were always bad, always killing off people. And this is ingrained in my mind. Well, robots and computers are becoming more and more common as we go along. And I ask myself, can we trust computers? And my mind says, no way. To a point, yes, but no way. Well, I didn't want any kind of this questionable technology in my house, other than what I could carry in my hand, like my cell phone, the computers that I'm talking on right now, maybe a TV set, but that's about it. Everything else can be push button, but to think on its own, no. Well, my roommate moved in, and he was one of these computer nerds. He wanted everything computerized. He wanted the house to be computerized to where that he could walk in the door on his phone, be able to say, turn on the lights, turn on the TV, turn on the stove, go to the refrigerator and pull out the food and get it cooked for him. You know, that's what he would really like. Well, he brought in the telephone, his little telephone, which I did too, his TV sets, plural, so that they could talk to each other almost. So he could walk out of one room and the other one would turn on. He had vacuum cleaners, and he also had the refrigerator to where that you touch a button and it would tell you basically what was in it. I'm starting to get scared. After all, it's starting to take over. Then he got this Siri. Did you know that Siri listens to your conversations? Now, where it's reporting to, I have no idea. But if you're talking along and you say, and then this computer over here, she goes, yes. I did not understand the question. I didn't talk to you. Go away. I didn't even talk to you. Then he brought in something called the Roomba. Now, the Roomba is a vacuum cleaner that you dock into a little container, and it takes off according to the commands that you have, that you tell it to do. Certain times a day, certain patterns, certain things that have to be done. Well, it worked very well for a while, but this Roomba is supposed to be self-learning, so that if it goes around your house, it finds out where the furniture is and it'll bump into it and turn around and go someplace else to finish its cleaning job and then go back and dock. He set it up so that his phone, Siri, and the computer could all talk to each other. Well, as the Roomba got so that it could learn the patterns, I found out that it also learned that it doesn't like me. Maybe it heard Siri told it that I don't like computers, because after a while, it would come out of its dock and it would go across the room cleaning, and it would come back away this way cleaning and this way cleaning, and then it'd go back and dock. And it did that for about 2 or 3 weeks. In the meantime, I'm still hearing and I'm still watching. I don't know if I like that little Roomba in here or not. Well, apparently it heard me one too many times. I'm sitting in the living room. It comes out of its dock and goes across the room and back across the room and comes back and stops right in front of me, turns towards me as if to say, this is now noontime. This is now war, and came directly at me. Now that's kind of frightening. It came directly at me and came underneath the chair and turned around and went back out again, went on its way and went back to the dock. That was the first time. Every time if I was in the living room, that thing would come out, would do its 1 or 2 passes as if to say, I'm not paying any attention to you. I'm not paying any attention to you. There you are. This is war, and I am going to get you. And this Roomba would come and attack my feet. Well, I told my roommate about that, and he says, no, they don't do that. I said, oh, yes, they do. So I'm sitting in the living room. He's sitting in the living room. It comes out and does what it's supposed to do, back and forth. And he says, see, it's doing what it's supposed to do. It comes out to the middle of the room and turns directly towards me in front of him and comes and attacks me. I said, see, this computer does not like me at all. And he says, Siri, tell the Roomba to go back to its dock. Siri would say, I don't know Roomba. Siri, send Roomba back to its home. Oh, all right, and would send Roomba back. Well, after a while, I started calling this thing Christine. Have you heard the story from Stephen King about the car that would attack the girlfriends because it was so much in love with the guy? Well, I swear that this little Roomba liked my roommate, but did not like me. So I was the threat. I named it Christine after the car. Siri learned Christine's name because of me. Is Christine out yet? Nope, not yet. Pretty soon she start her threat, her back and forth. And I've come to think about that as a threat because I knew pretty soon she was going to be coming at me. Christine, go back home. And it's almost like it stopped and look at me like, you're giving me an order? Yes, go back home again. Well, if it ended up coming out so far away, towards me, I could stand up and stand in front of it. Christine, go back home. And it was almost like a little dog with a tail tucked between his legs. It would turn and go up to where it's supposed to be and turn and go back home. Well, after a while, my roommate noticed that Christine was starting to attack other people in the house and including the dog. So, Christine, go home. And then she wouldn't listen. Siri, send Christine home. I don't know Christine. Siri, send Christine home. Still wouldn't do it. I would actually pick up Christine and go put her back. Well, do you know what happened after that? They say that computers are not supposed to be self-learning to this extent. She would come out when I was at work and she would go hide. She would go under the table or under a chair and stop. I would get this call at work. I can't find Christine. Where could she be? She's got to be around somewhere. Sure enough, she would be under the table, under the chair, somewhere hiding, almost as if like this. Pick her up, put her back in her dock, get her charged. And I would get another call maybe the next day. I can't find Christine again. One day she was gone for 4 days. We could not find that thing anywhere. We looked under the bed. We looked where she's not supposed to be in the bedroom, but we looked under the bed. We looked under the sofa. We looked under the table. We looked under cabinets. We looked in the other rooms. I said, did she get outside the door? Did she run away? Never, we couldn't find her for 4 days. Well, I finally did find her way off in a room where she's not supposed to be, not programmed to be at all, down the hallway into another bedroom. Tell me that computers are not self-learning. I have proof that computers are not something you can ever trust. Toastmaster.